Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This will be the second video on reality check. Firstly, before I go further, I just want to add on to the first one. I actually gave the meaning, the root word of the word deen as dana, which is correct, the deeper meaning of the word deen. Normally, the word deen is translated as faith or creed or religion, but there is another deeper meaning to be indebted. So I actually just gave you the root meaning and not the actual word deen, which is the common word that is being used. But Assalamu alaikum people, I hope to do a second video on reality check. And as I pointed out, that my aim is to create a kind of just an open-mindedness and a little bit more kind of deeper thinking. Sorry, I just dropped my phone now. In terms of what we are exposed to and how schooling has in actual fact affected the way we look at things and the way we perceive things and way we translate it, even the way we so-called critique it. So may Allah grant us, inshallah, the hikmah, the wisdom of trying to understand. Now, one of the features that I start off with is that schooling basically is a formal kind of child abuse due to its prescriptiveness of the education, the curriculum, etc., and children being forced to do what the state wants them to do. And the problem today is that we have this kind of, the gayism that is becoming, the identity crisis of people. They're trying to push that into the schools and make it a curriculum required in the world. And people don't know how to handle that, especially people who believe in God and believe that there is just basically two sexes, male and female. And so these people have a problem with being at school, being at university, etc., because they somewhat are forced to go to school because the certification is needed to go and look for a job and all that kind of stuff. So, but be that as it may, as I pointed out at the end of the previous video at Reality Check, the first one, that when one puts our trust in the Creator, then there's a completely different dimension of awareness, different dimension of reality. In actual fact, that is the real reality, because now one can actually see things deeper. So what are the features in schooling which basically traps people? Firstly, we need to realize, why did they create schooling? Okay. In our studies, we learned that the origin of schools as it is today actually came from movements of concerned people about the death and the struggles of children in the British mines. Children used to work in the British mines with their parents, and adults and children used to work in the mines, and children would die in the mines. So there were people who were lobbying for change, and they decided to take the children out of the mines and then create a kind of a schooling where they are really taught how to be, in the industry. And so that's where the curriculum basically started. So originally, schools actually started as a protection for children. But because it was done in Britain, obviously it was, and then also you need to know also that even medication, before they didn't know about pediatric medication. They only found out later on, I'm talking about the Western world now, that some of the medication that they prescribe to adults is not the same for children. So that also developed later on. But be that as it may, when colonialists took over countries or took over islands and took over particular areas, they disorientated the indigenous people. Now that is a very core feature, and maybe this is a bombshell, if I can put it this way, because what they realized is when they came to those particular places, and they knew that these people are self-sustainable. They can feed for themselves, they can hunt, they can develop themselves. They got married very early as young people. The whole culture was peaceful, tranquil. And that kind of self-sustainability was a kind of a realization that the people were living in line or in unison with the environment. So that is still going on today. There are still people living in the Kalahari, which is the desert. There are still people living in the jungles, and they are living completely self-sustainable, and they don't have the worries that we've got. We created our own worries. Okay, so but what the colonials did practically, and there's evidence now uh, all over, but I mean, there's physical evidence, for instance, in Canada, where they found hundreds of children being buried in the school grounds. So if what happens was when they got to the actual indigenous people, they removed the children from their parents. Now the children were taught by the parents how to hunt and how to feed themselves, and so they were self-sustainable. So the moment they removed the children from their parents, they stuck the children into these, missionary schools, and they actually made boarding schools. The kids and the parents couldn't connect with each other at certain times, and many of the children that became like really wanted to be free again, they killed them, and some of them died, and they buried them. So the separation of the children from the parents created that kind of complete dislocation of the self-sustainability of the communities, and then they brainwashed the children on the other side in their particular schools to follow their culture, and they starved the other people of the parents practically to death, or they must come and work for them as slaves or as workers, as servants, etc., in order to gain money. So money is not an issue in life, because if one looks at the life itself, it's available. One can grow your own food and one can get your water, etc., etc., but you must know how. So if one looks at the brain development of an indigenous person, it's much more fully developed, holistically developed than the city folk or the people that are schooled. So then we come to this bombshell that I said, is that adolescence is not a developmental state. Adolescence is actually a Western illness of the brain that causes a lot of problems. So how does that happen? The brain has a specific amount of energy that it contains, and wherever the focus of the brain has to go in order to protect itself or to develop itself, that energy is going to move to that particular part of the brain. Now, the moment the children are separated from their parents, the fear factor comes in, because you've split up a family. And this particular split in the family creates the first kind of fear. And then when teachers and curriculum tells the child, this is what you must do, and you pass, you fail, etc., it develops the brain's energy moves to the back of the brain. And the fear, fright, flight, and freeze feature of the brain in terms of protecting the body becomes more accentuated in order to protect the self. And the frontal lobe is not able to develop as fast because all the energy is moving to the back. So if you test any particular young person, what they call like teenager, you'll find that the brain of the frontal lobe is less developed than the back lobe. Not because it's a developmental situation, it's because of the stimulus of having been under fear all the time, that the back of the brain is much more developed than the front of the brain. Now, they call this a developmental feature of adolescence, but it's actually a sickness. It's an imposed sickness that is developed, brain illness, a brain lack of development, because you won't find that in indigenous people. They are fully developed in terms of their brain, because and also they marry very early. They marry in the teenage years. When they become initiated, after the initiation, the culture, they get married, they work with the older people and develop the particular city. Where we, in this particular Western culture, we separate our children from our parents, and that disempowers the family. And when you do that, obviously, enormous amount of problems happen. So, but if they teach you all the time that the people who are in indigenous societies are backward, and they teach you all the time that they are uncivilized, if you see that every time, you tend to believe that you are much more civilized than what these people are. But those people are much more civilized than we are, because they live in harmony. They are truly supportive of each other. They don't have any debt. They can survive in the circumstances that they are, and they have thrived before the Western world came in with the colonialism and the oppression, etc., etc. So we are sitting with this kind of new culture, which is a Western culture. We go to school and we believe that schooling is important. Otherwise, we're never going to get anywhere. And because we believe that, that is what's happening. We basically run into our own problems. That's why if one reads the Revelations, etc., and Quran, etc., you'll find that, the guidance goes that we suffer by our own hands. We create our own problems. And that particular feature of adolescence not being a developmental stage in psychology, etc., but it actually disease. It's like it's coming to the fore now. People are realizing that, but in actual fact, in the 1960s, Margaret Mead wrote about the indigenous people and how much more how intelligent they are in a total way compared to city folk. Now, one of the proofs of the fact that the Westerner, the scientist, the PhD, the professor who goes into research into the indigenous people, that he's not as intelligent as the people that are there, is that he needs a guide. He needs a person to show him the way through this particular forest or through the particular mountain. He needs a guide to tell him and to teach him how to operate within that environment, which tells you that a Western educated person that works with theory and critique and writing and doesn't use his actual hands to do things, that is actually less educated and less intelligent than the person who's in the indigenous communities, because they are fully intelligent. They can read the signs, they can read the requirements, etc., and they can survive. Because at the end of the day, whatever we are doing in school and development or education or whatever, it's to buy food, nothing else. So if we can grow our own food, we don't need education for that matter, what we call education. But the constant brainwashing of making us believe that this is advancement, etc., because of technology and so on. But if electricity goes off, you're useless. You can't do anything. Electricity goes off. And obviously we experienced this in 2023 with all the sabotage of our power plants, etc. It's important for us to be able to know how to survive on our own. COVID also, although it was covert, it was other features that was planned, also brought us to our knees in the sense of saying, how can you survive on your own? And because you can't even leave your house. So people started developing things that they needed to assist each other as neighbors and so on, and make their own ideas in terms of how to survive and so on. Now, that becomes difficult if we are schooled, where we are sitting in a bench and we are told what to do, and the only thing that you pick up is a pen. Then we're in a problem, because we can't even use a bow and arrow, to shoot an animal or know exactly where to shoot the animal for that matter. So Western education, which is industrialized, is by its own nature came from controlling the masses. And that's why when you have a young person that is growing up under those particular conditions, he develops a lot of stress and a lot of anger, especially the boys, because the boys are naturally, they want to work for the family. I've interviewed a lot of what we were called ruffians, scholars or whatever the case may be. And the main feature is they would ask me, give me a job so that I can sustain myself. And that is very important. So schooling actually is what I call a holding grounds to keep a pool of unemployed people that you force into an education so that you can actually exploit their parents with a lower salary or a lower wage. And there's a fee connected to the schools, which means that parents are in debt as well. And that's how you keep a society completely enslaved. And this creates an enormous amount of stress in our community. So drug addiction, crime, murders, stress, all the illnesses that we suffer in the Western world, is all due to our schooling system. Now, for universities to accept that is very difficult. So you see universities are discussing, what's the problems, etc., and giving solutions and giving all sorts of critique and so on and so on. But none of them will say that the schools are actually the big problem. Some of them will do, but they don't listen to those people. But the other sad point is that they don't know what to replace it with. So they go on with the story, the narrative continues. But what is interesting, you'll find the professors that are in the later ages, etc., they will tell you that the universities by its nature is so competitive and so cutthroat that it becomes completely disorientating because the structure is designed in order to make people argue with each other. Because critique by its own nature it develops mistrust. And mistrust creates disunity. And disunity creates all sorts of problems in a society. Because when you communicate with people, you're being taught to first critique, to have a negative approach to what people are saying, instead of looking at it and positively looking what can I learn from what this person is saying, and try to be more empathetic in terms of seeing it from that person's point of view, and then try to connect with one another on the goodness of things and not on the negatives or the critique of things. And that's what schooling develops, because if you develop a critique approach, then obviously you develop a mistrust, then you develop a dislocation between people, disorientation, and then from there onwards you get individualism, because not everyone is on his own now. Now that creates the necessary feature for capitalism to succeed, because if you've got a person that can think only of himself, then he will in actual fact obliterate anyone else, even close family members or friends, in order to make his own particular statement. And so you get to that point of people saying in psychology, self-actualization is the main feature in life. It's all different ways of saying individualism relates to selfishness, selfishness leads to egotism, egotism leads to arrogance, etc. And that arrogance is the road to the devil. That's basically what happens. So, and what we are trying to do in the society is to try to put out all the fires that we actually light ourselves. So we need to ask ourselves the question, we are in a situation where we even try to solve a problem through the actual tools that create the problem, such as academia. They're sitting and having all sorts of discussions, etc., and argumentations and so on, using the same tools which creates the problems to try and solve the problem. You're not going to do that. You're not going to be able to get there. And to negate creativity, because I call academia a cult. Why do I do that? It's because they have a certain way that you must do things and a certain kind of vocabulary that you have to use. If you don't use it that way, you're out of that particular cult. They don't accept it. But there's also kind of a what you call kind of an hypocrisy. Because if you write creatively, they don't accept it, but they use creative people's work in order for the research, such as people's work like Tesla, such as Ibn al-Arabi. These are people such as Ibn Khaldun. Those people are creative thinkers. They are thinkers that are connecting with the actual real guidance that the Creator gives. Because wisdom, hikmah, comes from the Creator. You can't create hikmah and wisdom on your own. No, that doesn't happen. You can have knowledges, but to put the knowledge together and to find the wisdom of things, that is a department of the Creator giving it to us. Alhamdulillah, that is something that, and when you experience that kind of, and they call it the aha moment, or you'll use lecturers that will say, I had a dream, for instance, Mendeleev, who set up the periodic table. He actually had it in a dream. The Creator granted him in a dream where exactly each particular element must come, and even where the spaces must be for new elements to be found. That is a gift. If you look at Tesla was 12 years old when he saw alternative current in looking at the Niagara Falls. So these are actual proof that learning comes from the Creator, and that people who are supposedly that academia that do not accept creative work actually consult creative work in order to make their particular papers. But when they start straitjacketing you in terms of this is how you must do things, and you must have peer review. Peer review is like a classroom. Everybody thinks on the same level. You can't get out of this particular thing. So then if you have arguments about it, it's your own problem, because you're creating the structure for arguments. You're not creating a structure for openness and for development and for growth, etc. And that's where my work, I've tried to do this work in terms of integrating everything. So, and then finding, because that's what it was done in the past. In the past, people became doctors from having their own particular enthusiasm and passion of finding out what can they do to heal our people. They didn't go through universities we go today, and then the curriculum is also set for you, plus the amount of the type of medication you must use is also set for you, and then you realize this is not working. And all of these things are coming now out on the internet. Universities have have fake particular research papers, and universities are covering up one another's stuff. And I used to do my laundry with a professor with a doctorate in biochemistry or something like that. And he said to me, my supervisors or my heads, they steal my own work and then they publish papers. So he said to me, if I have my life over, I'll go work in a video store because it's really a waste of time. These are people that are in the industry and they find out how this kind of competitiveness is at that level of arrogance, that they could actually do these things. But that's not our problem. It's just I'm trying to bring out the kind of tricks. I think one of the things that I experience in terms of selfishness at university. I picked up my wife at the university. She was studying there, and I went into the short loan area. Now, short loan area is you take out the book, which assignment was given, and you can only take it out for an hour, etc. And then you must put it back again because there's only one book, and everybody else must use it. And I found this disturbing fact that some of the students actually take the book and hide it inside the short loan area, and they come every time to use that book so that nobody else can use it. Now that is the worst of proof of self-actualization and individualism and egotism and arrogance that you can get at the university. Now, if this is the kind of qualification that you get from grade 1 onwards, you start competing to get an A, and the person will argue with you, I got an A and I got 81%, and you've got an A, you only got 80%. If that kind of discussion is happening, then you must know that you were doing the wrong thing. And that's what made me resign from schooling after 12 years of teaching, because I realized I was part of a structure of oppression. And I was earning money from that particular culture, and that is not good. And so I resigned. So maybe I can't put everything in here, but if you really want to change things, you got to create gratitude to people, gratitude to the Creator first. First, you've got to first realize what you have and what you've been granted, and then reflect on it. Now, reflection in Arabic is tafakkur. Tafakkur, Allah says, the Creator says that you must reflect. I created the Quran in Arabic so people might use their intellect, in actual fact, to develop the aql. And the Arabic, and I created in Arabic so that people can develop the aql, the intellection. Now, it's not the same kind of word, intelligence, like we think it is, doing a PhD and a professor. No, not that kind of thing. Aql has got three different meanings, and I think this is where I enjoy Arabic. It has three different meanings, but the meanings in actual are so different. But if you look into that meaning according to the Quran, in other words, related to the holistic feature of the Quran plus the character of Nabi Muhammad of the Prophet, peace be upon him, then you see how the meanings integrate. I'll give you an example, and I think I'm going to stop on this particular point, and hopefully we'll have another chance to do reality check number 3. The word aqala means to be intelligent, right? And to be, to use your intelligence, deep side thinking. It also means to hobble a camel, to tie a camel's leg, and then so that he doesn't walk away with your resources. And it also means to arrest somebody and put him in jail. Now, if you look at those three meanings of the word aqala, then you say to yourself, my goodness, but these are different meanings. Which meaning do I take? Actually, all the meanings apply within the context of Islam as the essence of creation. How does it interact? It works like this. If one doesn't take the guidance of the Creator to arrest your lower self and put it into the control of the guidance, which is, I would say, the Sharia. I prefer to translate Sharia as the guidance and not code of law, because it is like so British, It's like as if you break the law, then Allah suffers. No, the Creator doesn't suffer if you break the law. It is if you don't follow the guidance, you will actually create your own problems. And the Sharia then says you do this and you do that and you do this and you do that, and to control the lower self. So if you don't control the lower self by arresting it, right, your resources will walk away. Your abilities that you have will walk away from you. Like a camel, if you don't tie his camel's leg, it will walk away from you with all your resources. So the faith basically and acceptance of guidance of the Creator and the teachers, the first teachers who were the prophets, alayhi salam, all the prophets, may Allah have peace on all of them. They taught us the means of how to survive this particular lower heaven, okay? And the means to survive is not to allow the body to overpower the intellect. So if you basically can control the self, the desire for power, for money, for food, for sex, for control, for all of those things, then your intellect will be able to come forward. Your intelligence, you can actually experience the intelligence as you practice the things that advises you. You do this, you pray, you praise the Creator, you give charity, etc. And now people realize that when you give charity, your frontal lobe actually grows. You have more vibrations of growth of your dendrites and your frontal lobe when you give charity. It develops a more growth in terms of your brain. So if you look at the education that forces your concentration of energy to the back of your brain, which is the rear part or the stem, which is all the reflective kind of actions, such as fear, fright, and flight, and you take advantage of the advice of the prophets in terms of try to live a more beautiful life, then you can move that energy to the frontal lobe and you can grow your brain completely. Then you don't have a problem with illness of adolescence. You become an adult very quickly because you are creative and you are grateful. So now you can understand that the reported hadith that say, oh, you teenagers get married because this is a protection for your lower self if you can afford it. So if you can afford, it's our job as adults to make sure that they have jobs that they can sustain themselves. And that's what our forefathers did in the Cape. By teaching them a craftsman, rejecting the schools. If they didn't want us to go to our schools, then we leave it. Okay, fine. We don't need your schools. But we can educate ourselves. And we can. So our forefathers, they got married earlier. Their marriages lasted longer, and they had much more connection with the reality of life than what people have who are more materialistically inclined. If I have a certificate, then I'll get a job, and if I have a job, I'll be able to, take out a loan because then I can. All of those things just trap us. And the moment we get out of that mindset, it will be much more healing and much more qualitative. And I'm hoping to take you through what holistic leisure learning really means and how I extrapolated from the Quran and how it will help us to think differently, especially now that all the Western education and the colonialist features are coming to the fore on the internet. People are realizing the traps, but it's very difficult. They don't have the tools because they were taught through those broken tools, and now they're using the same broken tools to actually solve a problem, which you need to change the tools. And hopefully I can bring to you how holistic leisure learning changes the tools. One of the things that we do is we remove examinations. And the moment you take examination, we remove a fear factor. And then when a fear factor gone, the motivation can develop to learn for the sake of learning. And when you come to the point where you learn in order to appreciate what the Creator has given you, then it goes to another level of spiritual connection. And then the motivational feature and the energy comes out by itself. And you become a helper instead of an exploiter. May Allah protect us, inshallah. That's 30 minutes. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope it makes some sense. And communicate with me, inshallah, and we can find a way of how to handle our lives in a more kind of positive way, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Allah knows best. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.